Hey, hi, how you going? It's me, Valstrad, and today we're going to check out all the strongest combat powers for each of the elemental typings. Let's check it out. So we're going to start this list with all the strongest fire types, but just before we do, remember, if you enjoy this content and you want to see more like it, remember to subscribe, really helps out the channel a lot. Now, going in order of firepower, we have Yormantide Ignis in the top spot, and then behind we have Blazimat Ryu, Blazimat, Reptiru, and Suzaku. Now, Yormantide Ignis and Blazimat Ryu are quite close together, and they share an equal best-in-slot attack stat at 685, but Yormantide Ignis takes the cake a little bit in firepower because it has the higher HP stat, even though it's Blazimat Ryu with a little bit more defense at 612. Now, these two are both the exact same typing, so you're not really trading off anything there, though I will say Yormantide Ignis has a little bit larger of a hitbox, which can be sometimes problematic in raid fights. However, that being said, it's also much easier to breed a Yormantide Ignis with all of the best passives than it is for Blazimat Ryu, because Blazimat Ryu only breeds with itself, so you don't have as many breeding trees that'll get you there. Now, moving further down the list, we also have the normal Blazimat, but this is pretty strictly worse than Blazimat Ryu. You could say that not having the dragon type reduces its exposure to some elemental or super effective damage, but that's not really the case because fire and dragon is a really good typing that covers its weakness as well. And then we've got Reptiru a little further down and Suzaku. Now, for these bottom three, there's really not much reason to use any of them because they're not best in slot for any of these stats. We really do just have Yormantide Ignis at the top with Blazimat right behind it, sharing a couple of stats but taking best in slot for all of them between just the two. Moving on to the neutral category next, we have Palladius, Selene, Celestia, Fenglobe, and then Kingpaca going in order of their firepower. Now, this one is even more top heavy than the firepowers were because Palladius actually takes the best in slot stat across the board. Now, Selene does at least share the top HP with Palladius at 4,700, and she's got a few other things going for her as well, such as her exclusive skill Moonlight Beam, which is an incredibly powerful neutral attack, and it looks really cool as well. And the other thing is she's a dual type because she's neutral dark, which means you're going to get the stab damage bonus on all of her dark moves. However, this does come with the trade-off in that this exposes her to another weakness, which is dragon typing in this case, and that's particularly problematic in the current endgame meta because a lot of the endgame content is focused around dragons. So you've got Xenoloord and Blazimat Ryu. So this really counts as a strike against Selene, not for her at the moment. And as for the other three, they don't really have anything going for them that makes them stand out above the top two, other than the fact that Kingpaca is just an absolute unit. So if you want to use Kingpaca, you don't have to justify it to me. That dude's a beast. And we've got the water typing up next with your boy Yormantide all the way at the top, to the surprise of no one. This is the normal variant of Yormantide. And then behind him, we've got Suzaku Aqua, then Broncherry Aqua, Phalaris Aqua, and at the bottom, we've got Azurobe. Now, Azurobe is really interesting on this list because it does have the partner skill that allows it to be mounted and converts the player's damage into the water element, which is really useful, especially for the Blazimat Ryu raid. But outside of that, it doesn't have that much combat utility. Phalaris Aqua does have a standout defense here, but really it's just Yormantide taking the cake on most of the stats. Highest firepower, highest HP, and the highest attack up at 640. Now, all of this might change come Tides of Terraria, which was releasing in a couple of months, because that is going to be featured heavily around ice and water powers, at least by the looks of it. So you can imagine they're going to introduce some more powerful water types that might shake this list up a little bit. Moving along to the ground typing next, we've got Anubis leading the way with Nochlum not far behind it, and then following that we've got Warsec Terra, Reptiru Christ, and Gildane. Now, this is going to be one of those situations where we really need to consider other factors and not just look at the raw stats, because even though Anubis takes the edge over Nochlum with a higher firepower, HP, and attack stat, though we will give the edge to Nochlum here for its defense, Nochlum also has the partner skill Steel Guardian, which when activated is going to increase its attack and defense by up to 200% if you've got it condensed up to 5 stars. So with this in mind, I'm definitely going to give the edge to Nochlum because it's a much stronger PAL for completing endgame content like the Bjorn and Bastigor raid. Next up, we're looking at the dragon typing, and here we're going to start to see a few repeats from earlier in the list. So we've got Xenolord in first place, Yormuntide Ignis behind it, followed by Jetadragon, Xenogard, and then Blazamite Ryu. Now the interesting thing about this is it really starts to showcase the discrepancy in power level between the different typings, because Yormuntide Ignis and Blazamite Ryu were number 1 and 2 on the fire type listing, and yet they only managed to squeak out number 2 and 5 on this list, and this effect is only going to get worse as we look at a few more typings down the track. As for the pals themselves, Xenolord is sitting quite comfortably on top with a nice spread across all the stats, but Jetadragon does edge it out as far as the attack goes, sitting at a solid 730, while Xenogard holds the highest defense. That being said though, I still would probably give the edge to Xenolord just because it's got a much better move pool, because it has a lot of exclusive skills available to it. So it's got things like Satellite Bit, Beam Slash, Astral Ray, and Cosmic Meteor. So we have to make sure we factor those things in when we're talking about the overall damage or attack power that a PAL is going to be able to do. Though Yormuntide Ignis still has a good typing and is a lot easier to breed than Xenolord, so it's got that going for it. And that brings us to Pocket Pair's Golden Child, the Dark typing, and as you can see, we've got Xenolord on this list as well, but this time he's no longer all the way up at the top, he's been kicked all the way down to number 4, and that just goes to show how much discrepancy there is between the Dark types and all of the other PALs. So Xenolord down at number 4, we've got Frostallion at number 1, Necromus at number 2, then Shadowbeak in 3rd place, followed by Xenolord and Bellinor. And I've included Bellinor and Bellinor Libero here because they both share completely equal stats. And the other interesting thing about the Dark types is that we do have 2 overall record holders here in Frostallion Noct, who has the highest overall firepower amongst all the typings, and Bellinor, who has the highest attack stat. But we've got 3 more to go, and next up is the grass typings, and I will say this one's a little bit depressing because Warsect is my favorite PAL in the game, but the highest firepower on this list, which is Warsect, is actually the lowest of the highest firepowers across all the typings. And that's going to reflect as we go down the list as well. This typing really does just need an overall boost to bring it up to speed with all of the other typings. So maybe after we get Tides of Terraria, we'll get Forests of Fanghorn or something, and we can get some more powerful pals in a Lord of the Rings crossover or just something. We need something more going on here. But in order, we have Warsect at the top, Wumpo in 2nd, Mammorest in 3rd, who does actually have the highest overall HP stat, so there's that at least. And then we've got Lylene and Broncherry Aqua, who we saw a bit earlier in the water listing. Second to last now, we're looking at the electric typing, and Azumane leads the way here with the highest stats across the board in every category except for attack. And the attack stat does go to Orsurk at 685, who's otherwise a little bit of a glass cannon. Now, the thing I'm most excited about for this typing is just how much more viable it might become once the Tides of Terraria update lands, because hopefully some of the endgame content, if we get new raids or new tower bosses, involves some water bosses who are weak to the electric typing. So that might mean that the stab damage from these pals becomes much more viable and makes them really top tier or meta pals for completing that content. I think that would be really cool because we haven't seen that much use out of these pals yet, or that much reason to use them, at least not compared to some of the other types. So again, hoping Tides of Terraria can shake up the meta a little bit in that way. And finally, we've made it all the way to the Ice Pals, with Frostallion leading the way with the highest firepower and highest attack. And then we've got Bastigor, who doesn't actually have the highest in any of the stats, but is a really great overall option, especially for the endgame raids. And Bastigor is a lot easier to breed than Frostallion. And then following Bastigor, we've got Reptiru Christ with the highest defense, Mammorest Christ with the highest HP, and then Wumpo Christ behind that. Not really any reason to use Wumpo over any of these others. And even though Frostallion is all the way up at the top here, the other consideration for Frostallion, especially if you're talking about, say, the Xenolord Ultra Raid, is that Frostallion's hitbox is a lot bigger. So even though it's a little bit more powerful statistically, than Basticor. You're actually going to probably have more luck using Basticor because they're not going to die so frequently because they're not getting hit by as much of Xenolord's AoE damage during that fight. So to summarize, I brought all of the powers and all of the typings together in this one graphic so that you could see them all at a glance. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we already went into all the detail, but the one thing I will point out that we didn't talk about earlier is, as you're going to see, Bushy Noct is actually up there amongst the highest attack firepowers, even though it didn't make the top 5 in firepower when we looked at the actual fire list individually. So that's the only odd thing out there. But other than that, the list is everything that we already talked about. This is just a good graphic that's going to tie everything together, and you can see which powers kind of dominate each of the categories across the board. So there's pretty clear winners and losers here. We really just kind of dove into the top 5 for each individual element, but as far as the actual in-game applications go, you're really not going to be using all 5 from each element. You might just be focusing on the top 1 or 2 out of each type, at least from a meta perspective. Of course, you're free to go and use any powers you like. I know I personally use all sorts of absurd powers all the time, but it's just as far as actual meta and raw firepower, this is really where the top tier is, or the S tier if you want to put it that way. But that's everything for today, and obviously this list was very heavily focused around the base stats for each of the pals, and there are other things that we need to take into consideration when we're talking about what is the best combat pal, things like the pal's partner skill and their hitbox size. Though we did talk about a few of those nuances throughout the video, there are still a few pals that missed out simply because they didn't make the top 5 firepower. So some that come to mind, or at least one that comes to mind for me, is Felbat. But if you can think of any others, let me know about them in the comments down below. I'd love to get your thoughts on them, and we'll continue the conversation there. But for now, thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time. Have a good one.